Well, hello, folks. Welcome to Sacred Speaks. My name is John Price, and I'm your host. And today I bring you Elise Loehnen. She's become a friend, and I'm excited to bring this episode to you. I was also really excited to read this book on our best behavior and the price, the 7 deadly sins and the price women pay to be good. And it's a necessary read. Certainly, women dive in. You'll relate. Men, it's a necessary exploration of material that men tend not to be exposed to as much, so I highly recommend this read. This is a month of the feminine. I have a fantastic episode also coming up with Dr. Jamie Clark Souls and her book, Women in the Bible. And then later on, I will release a solo episode exploring both these episodes on the feminine. So it's an exciting month. I want to talk about her book as a cultural excavation. She gives it that framework, and it's necessary. She shows how women in our culture have inherited distorted scripts around goodness, worth, and belonging. And we don't just talk about the book, we talk about what's underneath it: grief, envy, performance, obedience, sacred longing, and the suppressed feminine. Again, necessary read. We also talk about what Elise had to face to write this and what I had to confront as a man to dig into this material. Thank you, Elise. It was a real blessing to be able to connect. So I would also like to direct you to her website, eliseloehnen.com, ELISELOEHNEN.com. Check out her podcast, Pulling the Thread. It's outstanding. She has a ton of amazing guests. And if you like the Sacred Speaks, you're definitely going to like Pulling the Thread. So also, this month is a marker, May is a marker of an exciting month for me. I will be releasing my first webinar, and we already have an incredible community of folks joining. So if you've registered, thank you. It's going to be a cool dive and a cool beginning, cool dive into the book that I'm writing, one chapter in particular called Little Teachers. Webinars called Reframing Suffering. The Little Teachers, we're going to explore anxiety, shame, and jealousy as core initiators, portals to a more initiated, integrated being. They are our teachers after all. So link, of course, in the show notes, and go to the Instagram, my Instagram, to find the registration page and click on it there and dig in. Also check out the new website at drjohnwprice.com, drjohnwprice.com, and register there. Get your email online, and so I'll be sending out newsletters and all kinds of content. That's primarily how I'll be engaging with folks, also on Instagram. So check out Elise. Be looking forward to my conversation with Jamie. I've had both conversations and I've read both books, and it's quite an honor to speak with both these women. And then later on, I'll be releasing the solo episode on the feminine, where we'll dive deep into feminine spirituality and culture. And I think that's it for now. Go check out everything. Thanks for being here. And for now, we'll leave it there.
Controls your dreams, persuades your thoughts.
So welcome to the Sacred Speaks. Elise, today's conversation is not simply an interview. In many ways, it is a ritual. Elise Loehnen joins me not only as the author of On Our Best Behavior, but as a woman who has shed her invisibility cloak, stepped forward with fierce honesty, and written a book I believe is one of the more important books that, as you said earlier, men need to read, but of course that really opens up and helps us understand a lot of the dynamics that have affected women and shut them up and out of culture, which we need to resuscitate and bring back this lineage here. Your witchiness. I need the witchy lineage, you know? So the book is not a self-help manual. It is a cultural excavation. And I want to honor that excavation by approaching this conversation not as a critic and not even as a host, but as a man in the presence of a teacher and as a fellow traveler trying to understand the forces that shape us and the possibilities that await us when we begin to name them. We'll explore the 7 deadly sins through a feminist lens, yes, but beneath that structure lives something even more powerful, a deep inquiry into the unconscious scripts that govern all of us, and also, of course, women's behaviors. Scripts written by the patriarchy, preserved by culture, and inherited through silence. Elise, your voice in this book is rigorous and researched. It's also intimate and honest, and it's clearly the voice of somebody who's walked through the fire and brought back something useful. I cannot wait to dig into this with you. I am super stoked, and it's good to have you here.
I'm blushing. Thank you. That was
No?
beautiful.
Well,
Can I
it's
put that on my epitaph?
yeah, just like a T-shirt. I'll send you the T-shirt. Yes, yeah. Well, it's true.
Oh,
I mean, your comment earlier about men needing to read the book, I totally agree, and I feel more expansive, and my wife is probably going to be very happy with me reading this book because, yeah, as we can also like, all of us, and I love your chapter on the patriarchy, all of us are, of course, affected by this, and it shows up in my marriage, in my relationships, and the ways that I'm blind as a man raised in this culture. And I think that is a scary thing for us to really name and talk about. The ego gets all defensive. And so
yeah.
hopefully today we'll soften that. We'll kind of resurrect some of the dynamics that got buried through our cultural process. But I just open it to you. I mean, I certainly want to
Yeah.
know about the book and where you are. It came out in 2023. And so, yeah, I want to pick up threads that have been dropped since then and discovered since then. So just
Yeah.
launch us
No.
off.
I mean, and starting with men, and one of the reasons that I wanted to write this book in the first place is that as I looked around and saw how not how little women have accomplished in the world, but I would say how little in comparison to our excellence
Mm,
and our not only our aptitude, but our willingness to work incredibly hard in multiple spheres all the time. I was like, this the math isn't mathing. And then what also wasn't mathing for me is when I thought about my own career at the time and when I wrote the book or when I did the proposal, I was still working in corporate America. I could look around at the men in my life and say, it's not them. I was raised by a wonderful feminist father. I have a
mm,
gay older brother who's a book editor. I am married to a wonderful guy of 2 sons, and I had been mentored mostly by men in my
mm.
career. And yeah, I had met I call them, nefarious fucks along the way. I'd been sexually harassed. I
Oh,
mean,
shit.
every woman has those stories.
Is
And
so
yet, yeah,
disheartening.
and still, I couldn't say like, "Oh, it's the men who are sort of quote unquote doing this to me or doing this to us." And there were just as many women who I felt like had been, if not straight up enemies, had
Mhm,
certainly not been allies or advocates. And so that's what I really wanted to understand. And I remember when Hillary ran in 2016 and I had sort of someone asked me what I thought about her chances. And before I sort of had an immediate response of, she'll never win. Women will never get behind her. And I was like, that was an interesting thing to say. Is that
yeah,
true? So I realized, like, as I looked around, I was like, I need to excavate this
mhm,
thing in me that wants to police other women and says things like, "Oh, I just expect more from her," or "She should do better," or "She's bad." Whatever it is, like, I need to understand what that is because I am policing other women. I am policing myself, and somehow we've imbibed this patriarchy in a way where we might be as much of a hindrance to our own progress as sort of the patriarchal men behind the curtain. Because we also talk about patriarchy and we talk about it in sort of these boogeyman ways, like
mhm.
the patriarchy. And it's like, well, what is it? And where did it come from? And who is sort of driving it? And I realized, like, oh, no one's driving it. It's this system that we set in motion not that long ago that we've imbibed and instituted and uphold in our actions, all of us, and it hurts us, men too.
Yeah,
So,
so and there is like I immediately thought about an ego and how destabilized an ego can be when it's being asked to change its worldview, which of
yeah.
course in all the psychedelic world you hear this ego death thing, and really that's this kind of I mean if we could name it anything, it would be the worldview shifting and shattering and that the nakedness in when we don't have a system or a worldview through which to orient ourselves. And we're asking our, en masse to do that on a pretty massive scale. And that brings up a lot of terror, I think,
Yes.
for all of us, and that's the beautiful point, I think, of your first book. So go into that a little bit around patriarchy. I was stoked to see it as the first chapter. I, I do I do wanna do my work of seeing the lenses I've adopted and to be more conscious, and certainly to I have a daughter and I have a wife, and I'm, in a culture that, of course, predisposes me for power and strength and things that can be pretty dominating.
Yeah. And just this feeling of like, oh, isn't this just the way it's always been and just the way it's supposed to be? And the way that we conflate culture and nature is
Uh,
so insidious, right? And really, culture can drive nature. I was talking to this woman, Angela Saini, who wrote this book called The Patriarchs, and she's also written books about women and science. She's a science reporter and journalist. And when we even talk about sort of the size difference between men and women and this idea that we have that men are so physically dominating and women are much smaller and weaker. And her point is like, in some cultures, there's not that much of a difference at all. Like when you look at Cattle Hayek, for example, which is modern, is that Anatolia, I think. But when
mm,
they were looking at that dig site, this is Paleolithic, and men and women are largely the same size. They were eating the same calories, the same density of nutrients. They had the same amount of soot in their lungs, meaning that they were both in the kitchen the same amount or
mm,
around fires. And their wear patterns were just largely similar. Like it seemed like it was an egalitarian society
right,
where everyone was engaged in the same types of work. And so her point is like even the physical dominance that we expect of men might be a function of culture and breeding ourselves in that way over time and not necessarily a function of sort of pure unadulterated nature. We'll never know, right? There's
right.
no version where we really understand that core question. But so that's sort of also what I wanted to interrogate. So many of these ideas, these scripts that we run, where we think of ourselves as these highly autonomous, self-authored beings, and a lot of what we're running are cultural programs,
Oof, yeah.
and we whisper them into each other's ears. They're highly contagious about what a powerful man is and what a good woman is. That's the core thesis, that men are conditioned for power, women are conditioned for goodness. And that might sound overly reductive, but when you boil it down and you look at culture, you think the thing that women are most susceptible to is reputational harm. Anyone saying she's a bad mother, she's a toxic coworker, she's mean, she's it doesn't there might not even be any, infractions, but that sort of reputational harm
Mm,
is enough for most women to actually just take themselves out of the game. But we will do it for them otherwise. But for men, it just doesn't matter. It just glances off of them. The only thing that is sort of deadening to a man is saying that he's weak, powerless, feminine, etc. And it doesn't matter if he's bad. We revere, clearly, we love bad men. We do not love bad women.
mhm,
We really don't in that sense. So yeah, just making stuff like that conscious of this is how we've been conditioned, and women in particular, because that's the primary focus of the book, although I write a bit about men. But our entire psychology is built around proving out our goodness. And I use the seven deadly sins as this punch card in the ways that we express this. And then really it's a book about shadow because it's
yeah.
also the way we take everything we've repressed and code it as bad and then project it onto other people and shame them for doing the thing we would never do and having what we would not allow ourselves to have. But yeah, that's the code of goodness. To be a good woman is never tired. A good woman needs no praise, affirmation, or attention. She's happy for other people to take the credit. A good woman subjugates everything she wants to other people's needs. A good woman has no real appetite. Her body is compliant and disciplined and as small as possible. A good woman doesn't really talk about money. She thinks it's base and unspiritual and really better left for other people and for men. A good woman is desirable but not desiring. She's sexy but not sexual.
Mm,
And a good woman is never mad about any of this. And she might be angry on behalf of other people, but never on behalf of herself. And that's the seven deadly sins: sloth, pride, envy, gluttony, greed, lust, anger.
I love the way you thank you, by the way, for that. My mind just explodes because the first thing I wanted to do is say as a therapist and as a, so I end up working with a lot of men, and I think this is a book that men need to read because a lot of the men that I work with, one of the primary struggles in their life is how to be connected with the woman in their lives if they're heterosexual and if they're related to women in that way. And so to seek understanding of some of the dynamics and the weight and the confusion and the burdens that women in mass tend to carry. But so I want to say that certainly, but there is a thought that comes to mind when we talk about men and we talk about women. You mentioned the term reduction earlier. That's one of my concerns, is that we are participating in a reduction because we're trying to take, oh yeah, you 50% are like this and you 50% are like that. So how do you get around that, or how do you navigate
Yeah.
that?
I mean, it's certainly a big concern, and that's why it's like when you get into these big cultural frameworks, they apply, and then obviously there are variations within that. So I'm talking about sort of like the tip of patriarchal culture, and I think as communities get farther or more marginalized or more, I'm a white woman, I am pretty close to patriarchal power, but I don't hold it.
Mm,
And so I think I'm able to see it and talk about it from my own experience. I think people who are farther away from the center of power would have a different experience, although they could arguably have a much clearer view of all of this
mhm,
in action. I think they're slightly liberated from some of these scripts. And I would say that a big part of the book, and one of the things that's a focus of my work, is talking about the feminine and the masculine as archetypal energies, more in the vein of a Carl Jung or
mhm,
even a Richard Rohr, even though so much of his work also centers around men, or a lot of this work is around from a male perspective. But, like, I've had Carol Gilligan on my podcast, and I'm really interested in the developmental psychology of women as, like, a fuller picture of what's happening here. But so thinking about those as archetypal energies that belong to each of us and that need to be brought into balance. And I think most women are very comfortable with this intuitively. Many of us are, even if we don't work outside the home, have a lot of masculine energy. We're just by functions of being partners and mothers, we're directing a lot of activity, we're organizing, we're structuring,
mhm.
we're holding strings. And we have feminine energy too. I'm more masculine, I think, than feminine. But I think for men, particularly because of this push for power and anything that's not feminine,
Mhm,
really,
mhm,
I think men are woefully severed from their feminine and not allowed to be in their feminine and have lost connection with that part of themselves. And I think it's possible to say that men don't have the capacity for the feminine, for nurturance, love, creativity, care, whatever we sort of put in that internal world. Again, I recognize this is reductive, but we live in a world where women are instructed to be more like men, when really our world needs men to be more like women and to let their feminine come up. And if that we had a little bit more equity there, little bit more balance, I think men would find it incredibly relieving. And I think it would provide a lot of the meaning that they're looking for in the outside world. And I think it would create a lot of relief, not only for women, but also for our planet.
Yeah, I think it's well said. It certainly matches with one of the things I'm trying to do with a lot of men, which is bring them into, these are guys who've been competitive and power oriented and assertive and goal directed and disciplined and have achieved a great deal in the outer world. But when it comes to being connected with the inner world, it's kind of not safe
Yeah.
territory. And again, that's kind of a distinction where you're looking at outer world, measurable world, rational world as a world of the masculine, and the inner world is more of a feminine
Yeah.
dynamic. And yeah, I like that a lot. And you mentioned something important, which one reason I'm always so excited to talk to you is not only have you written this incredible book, you've got this amazing podcast where you talk to some of the leading minds that look into this, and so you're just constantly in the pocket of of being filled. And so I want to give you some time to kind of talk about that experience too as we're diving into the book as well.
Yeah. I mean, I found you through your podcast, and I think it was through either a Richard Rohr interview or a James Hollis
Here are the
interview where I was
guys.
like, "Who is this guy, and how did he get Richard Rohr?" And then I, of course, fell in love with you, and
Oh,
I'm not as I'm not as in love with psychedelics as you are, and I
right.
have a lot of questions for you
Oh,
about what's happening in this moment
I
and
can't
how
wait.
much
Yeah.
ketamine and
Oh,
Burning Man might have to do with messiah complexes that are.
problematic. Yeah,
Yes.
problematic.
Okay. Maybe that's a whole sidebar conversation for
It'll be
another
fun.
day.
I'm in.
However, yeah, so pulling the thread, I mean, I wouldn't have ever written my first book if I hadn't started. I was the co-host of a very popular podcast at the time for many years called the Goop Podcast, and that was really where I came out of my shell and
Yeah,
had this, oh, people relate to me and think I ask good questions and identify with me in a way that is not scary or full of projections. And it's safe to sort of step out from behind other people and from brands and be myself in the world a little bit more. So there
hmm,
was both that was happening for me. And then also just like, wow, amazing people are willing to give you an hour of their time for a conversation.
it's
This is
incredible.
wild. And I think I was born to do this. I
Yeah,
love this so much. Or if it wasn't, if it's not my dharma, it sure is fun. And so that has been also just sort of the source material for my newsletter and for my books. And people who listen closely when they read my books are like, oh, I understand where I heard the source material. So they're watching me sort of synthesize
yeah.
and one of the things I really like to do is similar to you, I think, is like I like to comb through culture in disparate fields.
Hmm.
And I have some judgment about myself that I'm not an academic. I'm always quick to tell everyone that I'm not an academic and I'm not a theologian and I'm not a psychologist or therapist. I don't have a PhD from Pacifica. Like I love the disclaimer and sometimes I'm like I just need to go and get a PhD so I can shut up about this. But I think that the fact that I'm not an academic,
Yeah.
I have a well-educated, don't worry, but that it gives me license to sort of polymath out and be like, I don't subscribe to any single field. And I think all of these people have interesting things to add to the tapestry. So I can go really woo woo. I can speak to doctors. My
Yes.
dad's a Mayo trained physician. I can go to Richard Rohr or Elaine
Hmm.
Pagels or you and pull it into a single story. And I am allowed to do that because I'm unaffiliated.
Did you talk to Jeff Kripal about this? Did Jeff Kripal ever say anything? Because I can hear him in my head. I know he would say, "Oh, please, we'll ruin you." Go ahead.
Yes. I actually have had a whole conversation with him where I was like, "I think I maybe wanna become one of your PhD students." And he was like, "What?
Yeah, no, you
Get
got it.
lost."
You got it. You got it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think about, not to really dork out, but I went down a bit of a Renee Girard
Uh-huh.
wormhole, not realizing that I was concurrently doing it as the same time as, like, JD Vance, which is so weird to me, the way that Renee Girard has been co-opted by the right.
Fascinating. Yeah.
So such a sidebar, and
Yeah.
actually at the Center for the team at that Center for Action and Contemplation, I think are gonna do a podcast episode about it
Cool.
because I think he would roll in his grave. However, what I
Mm.
love about him is that he's a polymath, and so he's, like, drawing on literature and drawing on theology in ways that I know made him a little bit of a pariah,
Mhm.
and I'm not a pariah, but I certainly am, like, a hard to sort people don't really know what to do with me, which I kind of enjoy.
Of course. But also, one thing, considering I've read your book and I have a doctorate and I like, like your book may be 10 times better research than anything I've ever put out there in the world. But to me, an academic experience like that is really a rite of passage. And so we project a great deal onto it, but so much of what you've already done in your experiences, you've gone through the rites of passage. There's not some kind of container where you get to put initials at the end of your name, but you have contributed enormous. Like I think any university would go, yeah, she's got a doctorate. Yeah, like that makes sense. Let me read
Maybe I
your
can get an
gotcha.
honorary one.
Honorary, you're anointed, you know?
Well, I will say I have a lot of feelings about higher education, and I
Yeah,
went to Yale and yada, yada, yada. And I certainly have learned far more teaching myself, reading books carefully, interviewing their authors than I
that's it.
ever did in
Absolutely.
any of my seminars. I couldn't get anyone to really engage with me. I have
Mhm.
to say, everyone was too busy with the graduate students
Yeah, you've had
to,
real mentorship at this point.
yeah,
Like people have really
yeah.
yeah, and one thread that before we dive into the book, I've got a circle. This is kind of funny because I realized as you were talking that my first exposure to you was through psychedelics on the
Oh, me
Netflix
doing
series.
mushrooms
Yes,
on a Netflix
yes,
show? I
yes.
know.
And so that
I
was
know.
years ago. My wife and I were just watching everything we could on psychedelics, and of course, we stumbled across you, and then Jeff Kreifel and I talked, and then so now we've been connected, and that's really funny that we're going to continue our conversation on
About
psychedelics
psychedelics. I
at
know,
some point.
I feel, so for people who are listening, I worked at Goop for a while, and we did this Netflix show, and one of them was on psychedelics, and this was early. I mean, not wildly early, but,
Yeah.
at sort of the beginning of this latest resurgence, and, yeah, I did mushrooms with a group of people in Jamaica, and I did it. It was because I felt like I needed to destigmatize it by being, the mom, the West Side LA mom amidst,
Yeah.
like, the cool photo editor and all the, like, kids who were like, "I will totally get wild and hallucinate on camera," and I was like, "I need to ground this into something
Yeah.
that, like, women and everyone can benefit from." And I have to say, I'm glad I did it, and, as mentioned, I have some anxiety about what's happening with psychedelics, particularly psychedelics in improper containers and without
That's it.
integration, and
Yeah.
yeah, people coming out of it thinking that they're God, maybe.
Yeah, anointed by the Messiah complex.
Yes,
Yeah, and
yes.
I'm doing something about it. I've got a cool project that I'm throwing my hat in the ring. So
Yeah.
to be released at some point. But I'm with you. I'm totally with you.
All these bros with their glow ups and their Burning
Yes,
Man vibes and
that's right.
their super yachts. I mean, make it stop, John.
There's a lot of spiritual narcissism. Yes.
Yes.
No, I just
Yes.
yeah, I think there's given my training in psychotherapy, there's a lineage there, and I think it's one of the frameworks that really provides a kind of orientation. And so I think that just going out there and kind of this is what I think a lot of indigenous folks are confused by is that our culture's not set up for this kind of ecstatic experience. And we think that by going out for a week and doing something and coming back, that that's transformation. But I mean, I said this to a patient earlier today where I said, look, when you went to Eleusis in Greece, you went to Athens for 6 months in preparation for one of these ecstatic experiences, and so you had a kind of culture behind you, and we don't have that. But we're
No.
also but we'll get into this, but so I want to give plenty of time for you to talk about you may have hit on this earlier, but I want to at least ask the question to be sure you clearly articulated your thoughts here. You know, who you're writing the book for, what's the purpose of the book? Do you feel like you kind of check those boxes?
Yeah. I think that I wrote the book for women, really, just anyone who wanted to understand, who had the same sorts of sort of head scratching question that I did. And I needed to pick a big question, which is because, as you know, if you write a book, you're with it for 5 years, 10
Yeah.
years, 10
Yeah.
years if you're lucky, if people want to talk to you about it and are reading it. And that question was really, what is it in me that's inhibiting me from moving forward?
Yeah.
And how do I take the ultimate responsibility for my own life and the stories that I'm telling myself and the stories that I'm choosing to subscribe to? What does it look like to interrogate those stories and understand their original source? Because often it's just a game of telephone. We also
Right.
know that. I mean, that's one of the things that's so shocking about, so I grew up, my father's Jewish, my mom would call herself a recovering Catholic. I went to some Jewish services in a Methodist church in Montana. We had a female rabbi who flew in, and I went to an Episcopalian high school, and I've become a very spiritual person,
Mhm.
but I'm unaffiliated. I have good friends who are rabbis. I am, Richard Rohr stan. I only know what that word means because I have an 11-year-old, and I dibble and I, like, love Llewellyn Von Lees, the Sufi mystic,
Mm.
like my favorite pen pal. So anyway, so I grew up feeling like of all people, should be somewhat liberated from this agenda. Grew up in Montana
Yeah.
in a hippie, not a commune, but like this pretty hippie environment. And yet it was so deeply in me. And I would look and try and as a therapist, you must experience this all the time. I would try and take these stories that I had about being such a high performing child and this need to prove my excellence and will I ever be good? Will I ever be safe? Will I ever be secure? And I kept trying to attach the story to my parents,
Mm.
to my husband. And I remember this one point I was in therapy and I was saying how I felt so much anxiety about like in my throat chakra and like if I speak, I'll be murdered. And I sort of think maybe I was like all of us, probably crucified or burnt at the stake or whatever. I definitely was a witch at some point. But this isn't what we weren't talking about past lives. This is a basic therapy session. And he was like, who do you think made you scared to speak? And I was like, well, obviously it must have been my mother and like da 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 da. Da. And then I'm like, wait, what am I talking? This is bullshit. My mom is the least filtered, most outspoken woman I know. She's
Mm.
almost on the spectrum. Like you're like, wow, I can't believe you just said that. Wow. She was not quiet. She was not shushing me. And yet I think that's our instinct, right? Is to take whatever's happening in us and say, who can I blame and where do I place the responsibility for what's happening over here? And that's what I wanted to really start to unlock and understand, both for myself and also with the hope that it could help other people see what we're up to here.
Mhm.
And I will say for any men who are listening who need an extra push to read the book, like what this isn't in the book because it was an experience after I wrote it, but it gives you a sense. This is about so the sloth chapter is about sort of women and overwork and subjugating what we want to other people's needs and this doing and the anxiety that drives so much of us about being a good mother and showing up perfectly all over the place. And I would have, I've carried seething resentment at my husband throughout our marriage because he is not driven by the same cattle prod of anxiety. Everyone is always gushing over what a good dad he is, and he's just so engaged. And meanwhile, I'm like, he has like half the pickups and half the drop offs. Like, everyone calm down, Like, we don't need to find a trophy for him. He's doing his part, and I still do more. And so I've carried that, and I'm the one who's like cooking and cleaning, and we have help and et cetera. And he does stuff too, but I do a lion's share of
Mhm.
all of that work at the house. And I fell off a horse a year or two ago after the book was in production and broke my neck. And I didn't know my neck was broken. Ultimately, I was fine. I had to wear this brace for 6 weeks. But oh my God, John. So I, of course, had driven myself to get an MRI after, a week later, and a doctor was like, you didn't get a CAT scan? Like, what? And I had a concussion, and they were like, actually, your neck is broken and you can't
Holy shit.
drive. Yeah, no, I'm a doctor's kid. So I'm really good
You're
at
fine.
self-diagnosis. I was like, I'm not nauseous. My hands aren't tingly. Like, clearly I'm fine. I can't lift anything. But so for 6 weeks,
Huh.
I couldn't pick anything up. I couldn't drive. I couldn't do anything. I could not do anything. I had to sit on a couch and watch TV, which is very difficult for me. And I could sort of type. I put up pillows and I'd sort of type and I could kind of read if I held the book up and really exercised my bicep. And it was so hard because I realized like no one was giving me any grief. And yet the anxiety in me was mounting about
Mm.
everything I wasn't doing. And I should be driving my kids to school. I'm like worthless. I should be making dinner and da 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 da. And meanwhile, like my husband picked it up all up, no problem. And I realized in that moment, I was like, oh, this is me. I'm the one who's established these standards of what dinner time needs to look like. I'm the one who's established the standards for the cleanliness of our house. I'm the one who is upholding and enslaving myself to fulfilling this idea of what it is to be a good woman. It's not coming from him. He doesn't care. This is me. This is like an Elise show, an Elise story that I am running. and then trying to blame him for enforcing, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And so it was very clarifying to see myself in action and what I had been doing. And also that when I didn't rush to do everything within the first 2 minutes, or respond to the teachers or sign up for the whatever bring cupcake day, that he, like, if I gave him even 5 minutes, he might respond first.
Mhm.
But I was so busy proving my goodness and my, like, and it was all, of course, attached to a deep, deep fear of who am I if I'm not useful?
Yeah.
Why would he wanna be with me if I don't just take care of everything and make everything amazing? And that's what was underneath it. Like, why would anyone love me if I don't, take care of everything immediately? And that's like a deep fear that, again, my story.
Where does it come from?
I don't know. I think for women, there's this like fear of loss of approval. Like
Mhm.
if we're not good, if we're not compliant, if we don't sort of do our jobs in this patriarchal culture. Again, I don't think that our husbands or partners are saying this to us. This is just what we've inherited. That we'll be like, no, why would anyone want to be with you? It's deep. It was even in me. And again, like it's not how I was raised, you
What a
know?
radical insight.
Yeah.
Had to have your neck broken. I mean, that's absurd. It's like a slapstick comedy. Like,
I know. My friend was like, "You are a broken robot."
oh, jeez. I mean, the visual I've got is just so
I was
heartbreaking.
still,
It's
like,
heartbreaking.
making videos on Instagram with my neck brace. I mean, what a freak. I was
Oh, shit.
totally Joan Cusack.
Oh,
It's like, "Girl, sit down.
no.
The world
Sit
will go
down.
on."
Yeah. That's like a serendipity, synchronicity. Sit your ass down. I'm gonna show you something. You know?
No,
God.
you feel like that's life, though, now? I feel like my
Mm.
life is getting m more meta every day to the point where I'm like, okay, God, like, I get it. Like, this is a simulation, or I don't know.
Yeah.
There's so many things where I'm like, all right, I get it. Like, it's 10 of us on this planet and we're all gonna die and be like, oh, that was you. And that was you.
Yeah. It gets weird, doesn't it?
It gets so
God, it gets
weird.
weird. Okay, so hang on, I gotta jump in two questions I gotta jump into. Number 1, just totally out of my own sense of curiosity. Put the brakes on wherever you need to, by the way. What's an unfiltered thing that your mother said to you that stands out as like
Oh,
a moment
God.
of her unfiltered self?
Oh, I'm trying to think of what a good example would be. I mean, there's like the more hurtful version in like childhood would be something like I never wanted to have kids and just feeling like she didn't need to hold that
Oh,
back
shit.
or or soften
Oh,
that.
yeah.
My favorite mom story actually is so I went to boarding school and my mom, to her
Oh,
credit, I mean, my mom's amazing,
oh,
but
yeah,
she
she
was the
sounds
oldest of
great.
7 and, grew up in sort of scarcity and lack and a
Yeah.
really kind of abusive mom, but you wouldn't call it that at the time, but,
Mhm.
like, not kind, and would, like, lock them out of the house because she couldn't deal with them, and they would have to,
Oh,
like, go to the bathroom in the yard and stuff like that, where you're like, "That's so wild, actually, by today's standards." So, I remember going to boarding school as a sophomore in high school, and all these kids, you'd get mail at the post office, and it was an exciting event, and these moms would send, like, these elaborate care packages with snacks and all sorts of, like, goodies, and so one time I was like, "Mom, why don't you ever send care packages?" And she was like, "What's a care package?" And, I was like, like, "You could send me brownies, you could, like," and she was like, "Why would I send you brownies? I'll send you some money and you can go to the store and buy some brownie mix."
you don't get you don't get the meaning underneath it. I wanna be loved by you. Care.
Like, yeah, no,
No.
I wasn't looking to bake,
Yeah,
but
it's so utilitarian,
but
you
thank
know?
you.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, I'm trying to like,
Yeah.
it's just, you'd be at a dinner and someone would be like telling their life story, and everyone would tell my mom everything. She's loves to golf, and she'd be paired up with these random men, and she would come back and just be like, I know everything about this guy, and he's like never told anyone before in his life,
Yeah,
as
she's a conjurer of truth,
she's
just
a
brings.
conjurer of truth,
Yeah,
in part
wow.
because I think she's so unfiltered and just asks these
Wow, yeah, yeah,
questions.
yeah.
Yeah, like you're at dinner with her and she'll just be like, "Well, why did you think that was a good idea?"
Oh, yeah,
Or like,
yeah.
"But why would you cheat on your wife? Like, what was happening for you?" In a way that you're like, "Wow, you're gonna do that."
I
And I kind of have that. I have to say I have no problem asking the question,
It's
but
like a therapist.
yeah,
I get kicked
she's
under the table sometimes.
you
Shit,
do?
shit. Oh, yeah. Well, just because there are questions, and I see it sometimes. I'll be sitting there at a party, and I ask somebody the question that's not asked at parties, and
Mhm.
now the person's crying, and I'm like, "Fuck, I did that."
And you have to put them back together. See, I know where to I'm not a therapist, so I know where to draw the line because I
Mhm.
don't ever wanna have to put people back together,
Yeah.
but I do go right up to it, and I
Yeah.
people love it. All people want is to be known,
And so yes. It's truth.
right? I
Truth.
just wanna understand. I'm like, "Why would you why would you do that to your wife?" Like, I actually really wanna understand.
Yeah. It's true. That's true though, to deeply feel reflected and understood. I mean, that's gold in
Yes.
conversation.
Yes.
Okay. So, you're getting into some of the exact question that I wanted to get into, which was who you became. Like, Kreipel and
Mm,
I talked about this a long time ago. Like, we always thought that writing was like, okay, I'm gonna learn something and then report it, but it's so much more of a kind of exotic invitation into transformation. Like, we're
mm.
getting your transformation real time. So what changed? What moved in you? What happened that you couldn't have imagined when you started to write
Yeah.
the book?
I think people this is like the biggest thing people don't understand about books, and I ghostwrite a lot. So I've ghostwritten 14 or 15 books, and I'm
Savage.
working on a project right now. And at the beginning, I said to her, and this is a book about business. It's like some memoir, but it's business. And I was like,
Mhm.
it doesn't matter. She had a challenging childhood. I was like, just so you understand, like you have ultimate control over what goes into this book and what doesn't. And this is a deeply difficult therapeutic experience, and you need support regardless of what you're writing about,
Wow.
because what we're doing in any book writing process, if you go deep enough, is you're contextualizing your whole life and you're revisiting and re-examining your relationships and you're thinking about the stories that you've been telling yourself.
Mhm.
And it's like mini set of mini explosions in a way that's not always perceptible, but is very
Mhm.
real. I mean, and I've done this with so many people where I'm like, people literally like relationships, and I've rewritten multiple books like 3 or 4 times. I don't like to tell people this at the onset, but it's like relationships explode,
Wow.
just like weird stuff where people quit jobs, like, suddenly you're like, "I don't know, what am I doing? Like, what
Uh-huh.
am I doing with this person? Or what am I
Yeah.
doing in this job? Like, I can't do this." And really, to that end, I wrote the proposal for On Our Best Behavior while I still had my full-time job, and then not long after I sold the book, I was out on my own, and that was, like, the first explosion, which kinda need to happen for me to think about to unsubscribe from external structure and to be like, what is it to be reliant on myself? What am I? Who am I in relationship to the world rather than the way that I've just related to the brands that I've
Mhm.
worked for,
Mhm.
even as a writer? Who am I really? So I found it deeply therapeutic, and it took a while because the first time, and I pitched it as like, I'm going to diagnose culture. I'm going to be a little bit of a cultural therapist,
Awesome. Yes.
and I'm gonna
Yeah.
point it out, and then as we went through the process and I told some stories from my life, but my editor was like, "You've gotta write yourself into this and, like, pull readers through by the hand using yourself as an example," and I was like, "I don't think that I'm not interesting." She was like, "Well, that's precisely the point." I mean, she didn't say that, but that was my but in a way, I'm like, I guess that is the point. Like, you don't have to be, and I wanna talk about the cosmic egg in a minute because
Nice.
of Richard Rohr, but I told a lot of stories in part because I was like, this is a we story, actually.
Mhm.
It's my experience of a larger story for women, and I'm not singular. And very few of us are truly singular. And so just to switch gears into the cosmic egg, which I think is such a helpful frame. The
Yeah.
cosmic egg is that Richard Rohr, like there's the me story inside the we story, inside of the story. And I think he's massaged it over the years and like added a layer that I don't know. But I think having reading so much and reading so many memoirs and thinking about our culture at this moment in time, and he would say like the egg is broken. And many of us don't have a big story that we're lacking sort of our cultural cohesiveness, and there's shadow and light to all of these different layers anyway, which he of course does an excellent job of sort of
Nazier. Yeah.
explaining, breaking it down. But I feel like we're in this me story moment in our culture where people are like, me, like, look how different I am. Look how, like, I'm going to take this thing that happened in my life and explode it into this grand narrative. I read so many memoirs. I'm like, where's the we story? Like, you got to connect it to something that's bigger than you.
Mm.
And then where's the story really is what I want to see, like the me inside the we inside of the. And I didn't know that that's what I was up to. But when I saw the cosmic egg, I'm like, oh, that's what I like to do. Like, there's me, but this isn't about me. This is like me as like a little individuated, petal of this flower. And this is actually a we story.
Mhm.
And then we're all part of this bigger frame. So, and there's also some pain in that, John, when you're like, I'm really not that special, you know?
Mhm.
But there's a lot of relief in that too, when you're like, oh, everyone has had this experience.
Mm.
Everyone. It's weird in some ways because we're so taught, like, you are a special little sunflower, and yes, we all are, and I think we're all uniquely gifted. I really do believe that. I think each person absolutely needs to fulfill their individual dharma and make their contribution to the world, and I think all of our contributions are different, and many of us are having the same experiences.
Yeah. I mean, isn't that why I had that thought about, yeah, democratic, capitalistic, individualistic, monotheistic, all these kinds of sovereignty of individual. And yes, that's the point. Like what Zen says, if it's not paradox, it's not true. That like, how can I be both a me and a part of the collective too? And do we need to sacrifice one for the other? Collectivists say we need to sacrifice our individualism, and of course, we say we need to sacrifice the collective. Wouldn't it be great if we hung those polarities together? And there we
Well,
get to men and women.
isn't that okay? Actually, this is a real question that I've been puzzling through. Wouldn't you say that the answer to that is individuation, not individualism, but that
Yes.
Jungian yes, that, like, it is
Yeah.
our job to individuate, and that does not mean that it's individualism.
Jung wrote about this a lot.
Yeah,
He on some level didn't like the term because of its
closeness.
phonetic closeness to individualism. And so when people hear individuate in our culture, it's so loaded. They hear individualism, and that's not it at all.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah,
What do you
totally.
think there's a better word?
Awakening. There's that's what comes to mind there. Like to take it out of a kind of context. I mean, because essentially we're to wake up to the forces and the powers and the adaptations that we've all succumbed to. And I like this. I've actually got this line, this line that I'm about to read about absorbing the rules that were never written for us. This
Mhm.
is part of that rule that was written for us, and we've soaked it up in culture, and we've said, okay, shit, I got to be that, and so then we are. God, side note, more tangents. I think that this is why the Matrix was such an important storyline for our culture, to unhook from that matrix and to recognize. Of course, then we get into Neo being the one and all these kind of Messiah kind of things. Although I think the narrative itself is very true. Is that I am both unique and universal
Yeah.
simultaneously. And the context, of course, is something that we universally will have to liberate ourselves from. And maybe that's like, I'm reading this woman, Dorothy Solee, who wrote a book called Thinking About God. And she's talking about liberational theology and that kind of like become a liberated self. And that may be the better word, is to be liberated, but liberated not from any one thing, but what is your thing that you got. And I think that's really what your book is getting at, which is
Yeah.
there's a system that we need to get liberated from when we're all affected. And how do we unhook ourselves from that?
Yeah. And I think that I like the Matrix as sort of a verbal metaphor or example, because one of the things that I like to do, which I feel like you like to do too, is take what's hidden but perceptible and just reveal it. And then you're like, oh my God, that's so obvious. So many people after my book came out were like, this is so obvious. And it's like, yeah, I know. And yet, like, nobody said it.
It
Isn't
was
that
a bunch of
crazy?
work to make it obvious, just for the record,
Yeah, it
like,
was
I
a
had to
lot.
dig in, yeah.
Yeah. And like, oh, now I remember where I was gonna go when I was talking about being raised unaffiliated. But yeah, it's a lot. It takes a lot of work to figure this out and then say, where did this come from? And what I
Yeah,
wanted to say, sorry,
please.
tangent
Love it.
central, is that when I was first coming up with sort of trying to understand this question, what is this in women that what is it in me that makes me want to police myself and police other women?
Mm,
Why are they bothering me? What's the mechanism? Why is the instinct to swat her down and say things like, I just don't like her. Who does she think she is? And you can think of this on the grand stage with like a Hillary Clinton, or you can think of this as like your coworker who's going for a
mhm,
promotion, right?
mhm.
And I realized I was like, oh, it's envy. This is envy. And so originally I was like, maybe I just need to write a book about envy and undiagnosed envy, which is very Jungian, but this idea that someone has something or is doing something that you want, and instead of recognizing that, it's this unconscious action where you're like, I'll just destroy the person
Yeah.
who's showing me what my soul wants because I'm so uncomfortable and so bothered. Meanwhile, like if you reframe it and say, this person has something I want, I need to model myself after this person, I need to see what they're doing, I need to recognize this wanting that I've been unwilling to acknowledge. So I started with envy. And my brother is a book editor, and he was like, nobody wants to cultivate more envy in their life. Like, I don't think that's a big enough book for you to spend 4 years writing. And I was like, maybe, maybe not. But like, I love wars. And I was like, what's the etymology of envy and where did it come from? And I was like, oh, it's one of those sins. And
Yeah.
I was only familiar with the sins because of the movie Seven. But obviously,
Yes.
like, I
Oh,
recognize them from culture.
mhm.
And so I was like, "Oh, what are they?" And then I looked at them and I was like, "Oh my god, shit. Like, this is it. This is this punch card." And then I was like, "Well, where are they in the Bible?" And they're not in the Bible. And this is where it goes to sort of sourcing and where we even get these stories. And I was like, "How is this possible? How are they not in the Bible?" And you probably you read the book, so you know the history,
Mhm.
but they got their roots in the Egyptian desert in the 4th century. Monk named Evagrius Ponticus, who's also credited as an early father of the Enneagram, and I love the Enneagram,
Yeah.
and people who know the Enneagram know that they have each type has a vice. So it's the sins plus fear and deceit, which is
Mhm.
sort of like vainglory. And then he wrote a chapbook of little incantations to use against these demonic thoughts, which would keep you out of prayer. But they had very different connotations at that point. And then it wasn't until 590 that Pope Gregory, in the same homily where he turned Mary Magdalene into a penitent prostitute, assigned her all of these quote unquote cardinal vices, because in the New Testament, she's mentioned a couple of times as the one from whom Jesus cast 7 demons. And so some people say, like, he was balancing her chakras, but there's no mention of these 7 deadly sins or cardinal vices in the Bible. It's a Pope Gregory invention in 590. And he says, it must be these. And so it was written, John. And then here we are, Mary
Listener
Magdalene.
and viewer, do you see how exciting it is when Elise gets going like this? Let's talk for a second, because that was fucking awesome, right? Like, thank you for that. Yeah, that's exactly why I mean, that is so good and
Wild.
wild,
And so fun to
wild.
write this book because I didn't know that when I
Yeah,
started. That was part of I was like, I don't understand, but I'll figure it out." And then I was like, "Holy shit.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Whoa.
yeah.
Whoa.
Shattering.
Shattering. Shattering.
Yeah, yeah.
God." And to be fair, too, when I pitched this book and I spoke to different editors about their vision and how they would wanna see me write it, because you sell a nonfiction book off of a proposal. And understandably, a bunch of editors said, well, it'd be really fun if you wrote sort of a stunty book where you decided to become really sinful. So it's like you're a slut and then you're you just eat your heart's whatever. And I was like, yeah, sure, whatever. But like, that's not the point. The
Yeah.
point is that there's also a lot of essentially the sins are this internal navigational system of human impulses and desires
Mhm.
that put us in touch with the world. And if we use them as a compass, like, what am I hungry for? What
Yeah.
am I wanting? What do I need? What would enough feel like? Do I need rest? Like, if we use it as this sort of introceptive awareness system, they're incredibly powerful when brought into balance. We're not,
Yeah.
but the abstention, the denial, the repression, that's the problem. In the same way that, like, yeah, I don't think anyone thinks it's great to be over-indexed in any of these impulses either. Men seem to have no problem, but, story for another time.
Yeah, I mean, and yeah, and why that happens is important, and there's also a dissociative component of, how like, we say compartmentalization, it's this capacity to kinda go, "Yep, that's over here, that's over there, great, got."
Yep.
But I've got a chapter in my book that I'm working on right now. I call it The Little Teachers, and I'm gonna quote you on this because you deserve a line in my section on envy. Like there's a as a therapist, that's often what I'm trying to do is resurrect these, kind of bad experiences. Like it's not the sin certainly, but the emotions. I have 30 emotions from boredom to rage, all get put in this bucket of like, thou shalt not ever do that shit. And
Experience this. Yeah.
yeah, like keep it out and be good. And I work with folks all the time on this. So I think that's,
I'm curious, what is the experience of men with envy? Is it sublimated, or is it more like alive in men, or more
oh, certainly.
acceptable?
Yeah, totally alive. Very much. Um,
Repressed, or they like use it as fuel?
use it as fuel.
Yeah.
I mean, and then there's a kind of, because I think sometimes with men, and again, these are really global ideas, but sometimes with men, it shows up as an attraction.
Mhm.
There's an attraction to somebody, and it's like, "Oh, I shouldn't do that." So envy, jealousy is just like hard as I mean, that's just an incredibly complex and very difficult emotion to feel. Threat system activated totally. With envy, I think there's a kind of engagement, like, "Oh, yeah, okay, I got it. Like, I'm gonna thanks," like, I can work on that. Or there's a kind of desire to be with that person, and that can be confusing too because there is an erotic dimension to it, I think,
Interesting.
with envy, and because you kind of have something, right? There's something there, and so a connecting principle comes online that I think men have to navigate around, but,
That's so interesting. Yeah,
yeah.
wanting for
Yeah.
sure.
There's a
Yeah.
desiring and a wanting and a but I don't I would not put it as kind of one of the central complexes that men tend to navigate through in the same way. After reading your book on envy, it's really understandable that dynamic between men and women, how women experience that, given the kind of would you say the rules that were absorbed by women. It makes total sense that it's such a kind of nasty
Yeah. Well,
sense.
and it's very difficult in doing work with groups of women after the book has come out, and I have a workbook coming this summer with that I did with a friend who's a coach, because I have a lot of respect for the therapeutic arts and I'm not a therapist. And
Mhm.
so I'm good at like the high level context, and then but I like to pass the torch and partner when it comes to like
Yeah.
really getting in there with people. And
Talk
but
about
we've
your
done
newest book there, though.
Oh, I will.
Yeah, good.
Well, but there's this we do this exercise which really you have to sort of work women up to around wanting and even saying what they want. And oh wow, you should do it. If you ever have the opportunity to do it with women in a group, it's fascinating. First, there's the
Oh.
skirting. There's I would like, I need, I deserve. It's like, no, no, no,
Mm.
I want. Very
Mm.
difficult to even say that. And then if you stay with them for long enough and you keep coming back and doing sort of these question and response prompts and processes, you will start with someone saying like, I want something over here that's like quite superficial, not only in the sense of like it scratches the surface of this deeper want. And then by the end, you are like a football field away where they're finally saying, like, I want to be celebrated for my work in the world. And they may start with, like, I want a new living room.
Mm.
I mean, it's so disconnected,
Yeah.
John, but
Wow.
it's like, it's really interesting and really deep and hard. Most women have never even thought about it or said it.
It makes so I totally see your question about how men experience envy, 'cause to me, I immediately had a real generative feeling.
Mhm.
It's like, "Oh, yeah, I want that, got it, going after it." But this work you're doing, that is really fascinating and so
Yeah.
valuable, just to own
And
that desire.
yeah, and the way to get women connected to their envy in these groups and in the workbook is like part of it is like who are you finding that you're envious of? And here's how you figure out that you're envious because you're triggered, you're criticizing them in ways that
Mhm.
are are strange, like, "She bothers me. I didn't think that was that good. Why do people think, like, that book is that good? It's really not that good." You know, whatever you if you start listening to yourself and you need to kinda do it with a friend, because obviously we're not conscious of our own shadows, and they can say, like, "There's something happening here." Like, "You're in a maze with this woman over
Oof.
here." So you have to use envy to figure out what you want.
Mm.
You can figure it out by, like, what are you complaining about and why? Similar. But you can't just go in. You can't go straight into
Yeah,
the
you gotta
and
go
expect to
side
get
of the back
anywhere.
door. Yeah.
Yeah, you gotta
Wow,
backdoor it. It's really interesting.
fascinating.
Yeah.
That's really cool. Thank you for that little, eddy we just got into. That was really good. Because,
Uh,
because honestly, like, I think about guys, the kind of back and forth, the kind of lifting each other up, like seeing something that I want in him, but that inspires me, and I'm like, I gotta, like, what? It feels healthy. It doesn't.
yes.
So that's my because as a man, there's such a clarity around being able to want something. Just want
Yeah.
it, be it, like.
That's your marching order.
Yeah, and my buddy is doing that cool thing that I really dig, and in fact, I tell him, "Dude, you're really inspiring me," and he's like, "Fuck yeah, get on your stuff, man, show up." So, like, there's a
Yeah.
whole generativity around it.
Can I also say, and I'm being conscious of your time, but the other thing that shows up for women in the context of envy and pride Venn diagram with greed and scarcity very acutely for women. So one, there's this fear of being seen, which is part of the pride chapter, because you will inspire people's envy and they will destroy you. Again, these are all unconscious mechanisms, but
Oh,
this is what happens.
yeah.
And then what also happens with envy and pride is if because there's so much scarcity or the perception of scarcity for women, there's only room for one, there's only going to be one woman on that executive team, etc.
Mm,
We instead of saying, "Oh my god, look what she's doing. I can do that." Like I'm as
mhm,
gifted as she is, like similar to what you're saying about men.
yeah,
Our initial impulse is in order to have that I have to destroy her and there's not enough to go around. I cannot help her. And so when I
uh
look, for example, and I've written about this on the subs on my Substack and I've done solo podcast episodes, but in the world of podcasting, for example, men are so dominant
yeah,
largely because they are in a network with each other.
yeah,
They help each other, they share information, and they all run they run laps on each other's shows, and they recognize, like, they can just build and grow. That is not the psychology of women. It's like, if
mm,
I have you on and you prefer her if I have you and they prefer you, they will leave me for you. And so that's what I've encountered throughout sort of podcasting with
fascinating.
women is scarcity, all scarcity. Meanwhile, you look at the men, it's like, it's not true. This is not true, this scarcity myth.
It's funny,
So
I've been turned down by more women to come onto my show than men.
yeah,
For whatever it's worth, like, I try, like, I really try, like, I'm constantly engaging, wanting to that's a really fascinating truth, but I totally get the, like, there's a kind of, because I think there's a, "Hey, let's support each other." Like, we're in it together. Iron sharpens iron, we're in it. Let's go.
yeah. All boats rise.
All that. Yeah.
Yeah. Women do not have not had that experience. And so we're
Wow.
convinced there's like a psychological wall around it,
Hmm.
which is like, if she does well, then I can't do well. And
Oof.
it's deep. It's like a
Oof.
deep wound that I think is also a massive impediment. And also it keeps us like competing with each other. So we see her, I need to replace her, I need to be her, she can't exist. Rather than like, well, there are 15 spots on the New York Times bestseller list, like 100 spots at the top of the Apple charts. Like,
Mhm.
let's just, I can take a space from a man.
Mm.
Yeah.
Okay, so you're getting into, I think, some real like these unconscious mechanisms. Something about that. I'm curious. Just spitball there for a bit. I want to hear more of that because that's so rich.
Well, I think it's really important because I think what also happens, particularly when you're talking about women and goodness, and when you're trying to confront men with the reality of patriarchy and the way that they benefit, like they don't want to hear that they're sort of like the oppressors, right? Nobody
Mhm.
wants to. Everyone wants to believe that they've sort of gotten to where they are on their own metal and because of their own merit, and so I think softening it considerably by
Mm.
saying and explaining, like, so much of this, again, isn't conscious, we haven't chosen this, like, you don't choose the factors of your birth, that's for sure,
Mhm.
and it's not your fault, you're not like, nobody there's no one to blame here, but we can become more conscious, in part by doing this work together and
Mhm.
showing each other what we're up to and making this sort of a common cause and not rooted in the individual, so it's not just all in your head,
Yeah.
it starts to become more visible. And I think that's sort of what I was trying to say too about when you were mentioning the matrix, is that sometimes when you expose these systems, there can be a big awakening
Mhm.
because people are like, "Oh, I see it. This is so obvious, and yet it was hidden from me."
Right.
And it's a big cultural shadow, I think, ultimately. And then the more we can sort of bring it into the light and bring it into the light, the more we're like, "Oh, I'm doing this to myself here. And I'm playing small here because I'm trying to abide by a set of rules about like women and money that I didn't write and I don't really believe in, and unsubscribe. I don't want this anymore." But it
Yeah.
takes conscious awareness, and it will take many of us doing this work together. And we need the support of men,
Mhm.
not because it's your fault or you're making us do this, but because we're all in this together. And it's helpful when you can say, like, babe, what's happening? What's going on right now? In the same way that, like, I really want to understand the psychology of men.
Yeah. It's so I don't know. I mean, I guess the receiver of my shadow and my blindness is the woman that I love the most in my life.
Hmm.
And she's gotta wrestle and tangle with all this stuff, and so it's a real reality in the marriage and in the that's certainly you said earlier about being very spiritual, and I think that's one I say this a lot, like, one reason why I think we're married in spiritual spaces is because the marriage itself is a spiritual practice, and so that's where all the gunk is gonna come up to the surface, and it is tough
It
sometimes.
is tough. My
Yeah.
God, I read this. Not, I'm going to take us into another parking lot, but it was this paper by a Jungian about sort of like shadow vows too, and all the.
Robert
eh,
Johnson wrote about it, Owning Your Own Shadow. I
Okay, was it
almost
about like,
guarantee it.
yeah,
Yes.
it was, yeah, about all the covert, like, the way that we load our marriages with all this
Yes.
covert wanting and longing, expecting
Yeah.
the partner to be like, "I see this, I'm gonna take care of all of these things for
Oh, yeah. I
you that
got
you can't own
you.
in yourself."
Yeah.
Yeah. I was like, "Oh my god, that's what we're up to. Me too."
Yeah, and that moment of going like, "I'm not" well, by the way, I didn't say this, my wife did. "I'm not doing this anymore. I'm not gonna play this game," and puts down a boundary, and then I've gotta like, "Whoa," like, now I'm staring at the stuff that I've been resisting for so long unconsciously, and, like, now I gotta swallow those bitter pills, and I said it to a friend of mine recently, I was like, I've am in, like, 2 men's groups, I facilitate 3 men's groups, I've got a sacred, like, crew. I've done analysis of 6 of the leading analysts. Like, I read, I write, I'm a consumer, and holy shit, how do we survive this stuff? It's very difficult. Like, you have to
Yeah.
have a community. I mean, like,
Yes. And
yeah.
just like the self-deception that we get up to. My next book that I don't know when it will come out. I'm in the middle of writing it, but it's about polarity and binaries and shadow and ways to
Oh,
identify this in culture and as a way of identifying it in yourself. But it's not a book about personal shadow work. I'll
yeah,
leave that to people like you.
great.
Um,
Thank you. I'll take it on.
but it sort of one of the genesises of it was somewhat essentially like I can't even remember the context, but someone was saying like I was saying to a friend, I think everyone who has ever worked with me has really liked me. Like I'm a really nice person. I think everyone really likes me. She was like, "Is that like really something that you believe?" And I was like, "Yeah, it's like
Of
important to
course.
me."
I love
Yeah.
it.
And this was also at a time when the canceling people was rampant
Oh,
and I was like, "No, no, no, I really think like." And she was like, "Honey, she's older than I am and somewhat of a mentor, and she was like, "That is so fucked up. Like, I promise you, not everyone liked you. Do you
yeah.
like everyone?" And I was like, "Well, no, but, like, I feel like I was really fair." She was like, "Oh my god, like, what? Listen to yourself. Are you really staking sort of your identity on everyone liking you and
Mm,
everyone thinking that you're a nice person?
mhm.
Like, you're not the nicest person I've ever met by a long shot. Like, can be terse and demanding and, like, what? What's happening here?" Anyway, it was such a funny
Shadow work.
yeah,
Yes.
and I was like, "Oh, right," and that was one of the genesises, the way that I had subscribed to
Nice.
this idea of myself that was so stupid,
Yeah.
and yet we do this all the time. I
Like a
was
life raft.
Yeah, driving my kids to school the other day, swearing at someone for cutting me off, and then what did I do? Like,
Yes.
2.5 minutes later? Yeah.
Which, by the way, just public service announcement, I say that to all the people I work with. You don't have to think you need something to come in to talk to your therapist about. Just talk about the drive in, how you behaved in traffic, and bring that in. That will reveal your shit.
100%.
Yes.
God,
Yeah.
and, we will do anything to
Oh,
keep ourselves from the truth of who we
keep
are.
safe. Keep safe. We defend it, defend it, defend it. Yeah, not
Oh.
not are you defensive? How are you defensive? And where are you defensive? And where are you defended? And oh,
Yeah.
okay, so I wanna be mindful of your time, actually. Can we go for, like, 15
Yeah,
more
yeah.
minutes? Okay.
Yeah.
So, as far as your book is concerned, because 'cause I've got I mean, I need 8 hours with you at least. I don't like, I
No problem.
just gonna Zoom
I'd
call
much rather
tonight,
do this
Like, it's
with you than finish my chapter, which is what I have on tap.
ah, good. Well, I can't wait to that's a great topic that you're working on. How
Yeah.
exciting. You're really taking on culture there. What are the important threads of the book that we can't get to in 15 minutes, but what are we leaving out that we really need to include for our viewers and listeners?
Yeah. I mean, I feel like so for your listeners, I would say, well, or for men, they're originally, this I think is important. So before they were the seven cardinal vices and the seven deadly sins, they were actually eight demonic thoughts. So
Mm,
Ponticus wrote down eight, and the eighth was sadness. And he likened it, he was talking about in the context of homesickness and longing and attachment to loved ones and Pope Gregory dropped it from the list. He cut it, which
mm,
I think is really interesting, and I could not find no sourcing or no
mm,
information on why it wasn't part of the set. In some ways, you could say, like, sadness rolls into sloth as some sort of apathy, but really it just vanished. And I really wanted to include it in the book because I wanted to write a chapter about men. This question of like, okay, and then what about men? And in many ways, again, I was writing about sort of masculinity and femininity as these energies, but I wanted to write about men in part because I think that sadness as a symptom and the severing from feeling and feelings of dependence and weakness and grief is a core wound from where
mm,
I stand for so many men. This inability to feel feelings
yeah.
and to be disconnected from sort of the messiness and the muck and life, really
Mhm.
to stay up in their towers, to go to Richard Rohr, those towers that they've been building so industriously for the first half of their lives. I wrote a lot about the work of Terry Real, this amazing therapist who
Yeah.
does yeah, I don't
Love
wanna
his
talk
book,
about it.
Us. Yeah.
Yeah, like, love Terry, and his
Yeah.
specialty is sort of hard to reach, highly patriarchal men, And
Totally.
he collaborated with Bell Hooks. Like, he's an amazing masculine man talking about sort of anti-patriarchal, or the ways that patriarchy is deadening to men. And that's what I think is so interesting too, and misunderstood or not understood well, which is, you could look at patriarchy and say, wow, men really benefit. They don't.
Mhm.
Men are really struggling, and particularly the ones who aren't rich. I think a lot
Yeah.
of the discussion around masculinity right now and the consternation about masculinity is deserved, because yes, men are in dire straits, shit,
Yeah.
and deaths of despair and suicidality and these wounded boys, you become
It's
wounded
horrible.
men. It's
Yeah.
horrible. Yeah, all the mass violence, like, it's the men. Like, look at our politics, it's the men. And yet, I think there's like a lack of nuance, that like a filter that's really, really missing when you think about the work of, like, what's his name, Robert Reeves or Richard Reeves, of Boys and Men. That book got a
Mhm.
lot of
Mhm.
steam, but it drives me crazy a little bit, because, and it's like consternation of like, let's redshirt boy. Sure. And I have 2 sons, by the way. So like,
Mhm.
I get it on some level. And also I'm like, my sons will be fine. Okay. They're going to be fine. The white, upper middle class and above, middle class and above boys are fine. They're going to college at the same rates.
Right.
They will continue to occupy the same halls of power and dominate boardrooms and courthouses and the White House. I have no doubt. It's the poor boys,
Mhm.
it's the boys of color and other marginalized groups who are drifting. And that's where we need to be applying pressure and interest, not to like John Smith the third, you know?
Yeah.
And so that feels, and like what's really interesting is, I'm a big fan of this professor Niobe Way, who studies boys and interviews them, and she was a student of Carol Gilligan, and they've
Mhm.
collaborated a lot. She's wonderful.
Where is she?
Um, what'd you say?
Do you know where she is?
NYU. She's a
NYU.
professor at
Cool.
NYU. She
Cool.
might be at Berkeley right now, but she just wrote a new book, which is great. And she looks at the journals of school shooters and is sort of diagnosing it again from a cultural perspective, and actually talking to these boys about what they say and what's happening again in the shadow and this fear of the feminine for this particular group of boys, is that education has been coded in their minds as girly and gay. Same with intimacy, closeness, friendship, relationship. They
Yeah.
say those words, it's girly and gay. And so they feel forced to shut themselves off
Mhm.
and to not care about education, et cetera. And when you look at how gay men are doing as a subset, and this is where sort of the gay men are killing it. It's like, if you took gay men as a subset of culture, they would be the most educated in the world by far. It's like, I think 52% have like a master's degree. I can't remember the exact statistic. But like, that's where people like Richard Reeves, like, he's not like dicing it in those ways of
Mhm.
saying like, this is the problem over here in this, like, this corner of this rampant masculinity, this sort of delusional masculinity, that these guys think that they should be able to go it alone
Mhm.
and succeed, and are drifting. Like, that's what we need to cure. Instead, we're focusing on now all of our attention again on like the top of the pyramid.
Mhm. Yeah.
Anyway, thank you for listening to my TED Talk.
Thank you for, addressing that. I was just thinking, doctor, really appreciate that. That was very well researched and articulated. It seems like, where did you get your doctorate? So, I wanna be mindful of time because, of
Okay.
course, we could do this forever, and I hope
We'll
to. I
do it
mean,
again.
you've got more books coming out. I need more excuses to talk to you. And thanks for that advocacy there, and I think the gentle reminder, and my frustration is that when we speak in terms of specifics, whether we're looking at particular religious issues or gender issues, it's so we can't talk about these things without pissing some people off because we won't be including their narrative, and then also, and justifiably so, right? Like, that is a very understandable anger, and then what do we do with that? And how do we make our voices be heard? And how do we seek clarity? And how do we engage in conversation and not just cancel people? Which,
Yeah.
you referenced that earlier. That's a real problem.
Yeah. And I would just say to anyone where it makes people feel uncomfortable, it's like, then search for the larger paradigm, to quote Ken Wilber, transcend and include.
Yeah.
Like, everyone is included. We're all part of the story. So, like, but we need a wide enough frame. We need a big enough paradigm where everyone fits. I feel like that's what that's what's being asked of us right now in this moment of like what feels like extreme reorder is like, extreme disorder.
Yeah.
Can we reorder and create a bigger tent, a bigger umbrella where all of these things fit?
Amen to that. I know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's just do that.
Let's, yes. We're going on the road, folks. We're going. You said tent. I heard it here. Revivalist. We're doing it. No dogma. All togetherness. Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. And then we'll have a conversation on psychedelics eventually because
Yeah,
that's our
I
meeting
do.
point.
It's a
Um,
thing.
so any other things in closing that you'd like for folks to know about
No, this was
you, about
so
what you're
fun.
doing? Oh my
Yeah.
gosh, I
Come
love.
listen to Pulling the
Yeah.
Thread. We'll hang out there. If you like
Yeah.
Sacred Speaks, our shows are cousins,
Yes, they are.
maybe more closely related,
Yeah.
TBD.
Yes,
And then I
first
have a
cousins.
Substack of the same name, Pulling the Thread. And yeah, just trying to build community. There are a lot of us, and I feel like everyone feels so disenfranchised, but there's a home for everyone, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah, links below. Check out Elise. Elise, so much love. I love you too. What a
I love you
beautiful.
too. You're the
Yeah,
best.
you're the
Thank
best.
you.
Thank you so much.
Persuade